Hello and welcome to the Make Things Better podcast. Today I have Ross McCulloch on the show. Ross McCulloch works for the Third Sector Lab. He is the director there, but I'm sure we'll discover a lot more about Ross throughout the show. So welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on. I really do appreciate your time. You want to start off by just telling us a little bit about what you do, your background, and how long you've been doing it for?
Yeah. It's funny. I was in the pub with someone last night and talking about how bad I am at elevator pitches. So I'll go as well as I can. I've been doing this, working in charity digital for over 10 years now. It was previously head of comms with a national charity. And our work's quite varied. So I guess when I started out, it was more in social media and comms. And over the last few years now, much more thinking about digital in the broader sense. So how we use digital to deliver services, how we'd use digital deliver the value to the charities that we work with. So all of our client base is charities, but occasionally we've worked with people like Scottish Government and NHS, about 95-ish% are charities. And yeah, really, I guess helping people think about how they can do more with digital is essentially what we're trying to do. So I've done things like developed SCVO's digital leadership program back in 2016. So that's now had over 250 charity leaders come through that program. We're on another one in 2021-22, which is really exciting. We're doing some work with some charities in Wales at the moment with WCVA and Wales Cooperative. So we're taking them through a really intensive kind of 6-week design process of helping them think about understanding the problems in their organisation, understanding the way that their service users are living their lives and how they can use digital to help them in new and interesting ways. So that's been really cool. So yeah, so it's funny. It's like COVID has been terrible, but at the same time has really, I think, opened up people's eyes to potentially digital in the third sector in a way that wasn't happening before. And what we're seeing now is less conversations where you're having to convince people at board level or senior management level that this stuff has merit. So everyone, that kind of argument's gone. Like nobody's having to be convinced this stuff has merit. It's like, what do we actually do with it? How do we embed it so that it's not just a flash in the pan thing we did during COVID and now we forget about it again, but actually becomes integral to how we do what we do?
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear, because one of my first questions was going to be, how have charities been impacted by COVID? And you've already said really that there's maybe a bit more sort of demand for digital content, because obviously they need to support people and maybe they need to do that through digital even more than before. Do you think overall then, what other changes have there been perhaps to charities since COVID? Has it had a good or a bad impact on the amount of work that they can do?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a mixed bag, and it depends on the type of charity. I mean, so many charities, are delivering face-to-face services, and the way that they deliver them or the people they're trying to support, I mean, that's still going to be their bread and butter, and actually trying to do that digitally is going to be really tricky. But I mean, there's just been so many, like there was one really small charity in Scotland where they used to do, it was like kind of dance sessions for seniors in like a community group in Glasgow, and they managed to move that onto Zoom, and it was like an interesting combination of taking a service, putting it on Zoom, and actually digital inclusion, where they're having to very, very quickly support some of those older people to get online who'd never been online before, but very quickly they were getting online because they had an incentive to do it. Whereas I think pre-COVID, for a lot of groups who weren't online, there was no incentive. So for those older people, the incentive was that dance group I go to every Thursday, I can still continue to do that. It will just be online. And actually, some charities now seeing that accessibility piece in digital, whereas before it was like a kind of brick wall of, well, people don't have devices or they don't know how to use the internet, so we just won't bother doing it. Whereas now they're seeing the fact that, well, actually, we were kind of forcing people to sit in a bus for 45 minutes to come into our office because we'd shoehorned them into how our organisation's structured, rather than us thinking about how do they live their lives and how do we fit in with that. And so I think there's for a lot of charities been a bit of a mindset change where they're like, oh, actually our organisational structure is of no interest to the people we're here to support. And it's allowed them to kind of get back to that reason they were set up in the first place. Now, that's not universal and everyone's going to be different. I do think we're now also at a period where, some people veered very quickly into thinking, right, we do a thing in a physical space, now we just do that thing on Zoom, without thinking, well, what are the opportunities that digital offers to think about doing this in quite different ways that are appropriate. And so there's this kind of weird kind of period we're in right now where I think people are trying to take stock of what this is going to look like. And there's a danger that some charities might be like, well, you know, we did that stuff in Zoom, but now we just go back to the stuff being in our office because it's safe again with all the jags. And I think that the kind of better ones are looking at those opportunities for kind of blended approaches to delivering services. And that's where it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Talking about sort of dance class. So my mum's got like an illness that she uses a lot of charities really in Sheffield. So one of the charities was a Sheffield United sort of community program. I'm a Sheffield Wednesday fan, so I was never a big fan of this because she's bringing home all this Sheffield United merchandise, and I'm like, Mum, that can't be in the house. I'm not happy with that. But one of the great things that she was doing was a sort of dance type active class online, and she really did enjoy that. So I guess what you're saying is that charities now, they've had time to kind of change things a little bit, and now they need to really think about the overall approach to the work that they do, because there are so many opportunities online and they can do that, but they can also, once maybe things settle down, they can do things in real life as well. So that's great to hear, really, because I don't think this topic's talked about too much, and what we're trying to do at Hive IT in this podcast really is just talk about how we can change the world through technology and just make things a little bit better, really. I guess my other question was, what do the third sector lab do, maybe a little bit more specifically? So you said obviously you work with a lot of charities trying to help them with their digital approach. How do you really go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, our work can be pretty varied. So, I mean, a lot of it is dependent on, you know, client budget and time and kind of what we can offer. What we've always tried to do is being able to offer as much as we can free at the point of access. So we have a thing at the moment called the Curve, which we ran during COVID. So I mean, COVID still exists, but we ran last year. So we trained, there was like 1,700 places taken up, and basically we have a free workshop that happens every week. And so charities can take part in that now. So we've got a workshop happening every week until the end of the financial year in 2022. And so we've worked with 5 funders in Scotland, but it's open actually to any charity globally, never mind UK or Scotland. So Robertson Trust, RS McDonald, William Grant Foundation, Inspire in Scotland, and the National Lottery as well here in Scotland. And that's basically allowed us to get in some pretty amazing trainers to run these free workshops. So it's been everything from things like building data dashboards, basic SEO skills. We've got one running today, Bobby Robertson's doing one on digital strategy. And so the idea was like people can kind of drop in and pick and choose, but also what we've seen is a lot of charities now where they've done a digital skills assessment of their staff and they're like, right, we have 2 options here. We can either upskill our staff or we need to go and find a lot of money to bring people in to do this stuff. And actually for a lot of charities, that's just not an option. And so we've seen some where it's like, you know, someone's like literally coming for like a month of training, like back to back, week after week, being able to get new skills, which has been really, really exciting. And then a lot of the work we do is going in and doing strategy sessions with charities and helping them understand what that looks like and trying to demystify it a bit, because a lot of the time it's just, you know, consultants come in, it's a very, very expensive process, and a lot of the time the process has been completely over-engineered. It's like, you know, there's a charity we've done some work with recently and they had consultants in previously and the consultant had left them with a 330-page digital roadmap. You know, a year on, nobody in the senior management team had read this roadmap. Certainly no one as a frontline member of staff in a care organisation is going to have looked at that. And it's like, if your engagement as a member of staff or a volunteer is with a thing that is 330 pages long, you're never going to engage with it. And it's trying to think about the mechanisms in which people can engage, not in meaningless ways, but in ways that are much, much easier for them to have that initial leap in. So things, you know, simple things like getting an organisation to develop a digital mission statement. So how does digital help you achieve what's in your organisational strategy or your business plan? You don't need some big separate thing that sits alongside it. That's really what we're trying to do. And sometimes that can be as short as like a 90-minute session with their board. And that 90-minute session is enough for the board to go, right, that's what digital means. And sometimes it's just taken out of silos. So a lot of the time we'll go to an organisation that's just, that organisation talks about digital and actually what they're talking about is IT infrastructure. Or we go in and actually what they're talking about is social media and comms. And that's fine, and that's going to be part of that jigsaw, but actually getting them to understand it's everything. It's the clunky toil process that I'm a member of staff and I want to know what I've got, and I have to speak to my line manager, and then they sigh, and then they speak to someone in HR, and then you get sent a really weirdly formatted Word document, and then maybe a week later you find out how much toil you've got, and it's taken someone 4 hours of added up time to make that happen. And actually now that organisation has an HR platform and the person can log in, they can manage that stuff themselves. And so it's that kind of unsexy stuff, and things like, you know, onboarding with forms. And what we've seen a lot is like charities have good services. So like that, the dance class we mentioned, right, amazing service. What you might then find is like trying to actually get access to that service is almost impossible. So you need to know it exists. You need to know that you have to actually phone up to book a place on it. You need to know that it's only on a Tuesday at 2 p.m. You need to then know the Zoom link, and it, you know, that simple thing of which would be normal to you and I is like, well, we'll put a form on the website. We'll have a really clear landing page that explains all this. I'll fill out the form and it'll automatically tie into that Zoom account, and that person will get an automatic thing to remind them 24 hours before the event. And it's those types of processes that often are lacking. Is like there's a good service at the core, but there's nothing that sits on the onboarding or the offboarding of that person. And those are the bits that, like, when the kind of penny drops and charities realise the value of that and how much time that can save them and how much better an experience it is for that end user, that's when you can really start to use digital effectively, I think, rather than it just feeling like it's a kind of, it's an add-on or it's a one-off thing.
Yeah, so sounds to me like you're taking charities that do really good work and then you're bringing everything together online and just putting it all sort of in a place where it's just so much more effective for users to then go and find it and use it. And obviously on social media, that is going to play such a massive part, because I suppose with COVID as well, you're not really going to have maybe as much sort of word of mouth recommendations. I'm sure a lot of like the charities that my mum perhaps has gone to in the past have been through like a friend of a friend where they're meeting and then they're saying, oh yeah, I went to this the other day, or whatever it may be. Yeah. So yeah, the online presence is just so crucial. Do you find you get much engagement with the posts online? Because this is just something I was thinking about the other day, is sometimes you have to be a little bit more vulnerable perhaps if you were to comment or message a charity about a particular service. And so people online, especially because the whole world might see their post, you know, how much engagement do you really get really with a post online through charities?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I think, I mean, it depends so much, like anything on social media, with like the age group and the subject matter and like the approach that you're taking. There's a really nice campaign. It's a couple of years old now, but one that I really liked, which was from See Me, who are a mental health charity based in Scotland. And they basically, I mean, fundamentally, we're trying to kind of reach out to an under 25s audience, kind of struggling through a lot of their kind of natural channels where they'd had previous successes like Facebook and Twitter, started using Instagram, probably taking that kind of same approach from those other channels, but actually finding it just wasn't working for that channel and had a complete rethink. And one of the things they do, which was so simple, was they basically had a hit list of Instagram accounts in Scotland that are largely followed by that under 25s demographic. And it's that kind of influencer tag that I think can be off-putting for a lot of charities, where they see it as being vacuous or they see it as being unattainable because they're like, we need to reach out to someone who's got 4 million followers. And actually their hit list initially, I think, had about 20 accounts on it. And so we're talking about, like, there's a guy, Rich, who runs Abandoned Ship Clothing in Glasgow, like quite a small clothing label. Hard Grind, that's like a barber shop up in Dundee. And so we're not talking about these kind of like multinational, multi-million follower accounts, but actually localized under 25s audience, might have 40,000 followers, but those followers trust them and listen to what they're saying. And so they reached out with this concept, and the idea behind the campaign was to get people to talk openly about their mental health in a way that suited them. There was no kind of hard, rigid rules about the way that you do it. Out the 20 people, basically 15 came back and said either, no, I'm not comfortable because it's not part of my brand, or I want lots of money. 5 of them came back and said, yep, sounds like an amazing idea, I'd love to be part of this. And so when the charity launched that campaign, and basically the campaign was, we want you to talk openly about things that you are struggling with. So this notion of your unfiltered life that isn't the polished version of your life you put on Instagram. And so when those 5 accounts were the first posts, what happened was, collectively through those 5 accounts, I think it was something like 300,000 people following those 5 accounts collectively. So they hit their demographic like instantly on that first day of that campaign. What they didn't do is like, right, we're going to do a top-down campaign. The post is going to come through the official channel of this charity. Then we're going to spend a fortune trying to target those people, and it's going to come on their feed as an ad or a promoted post. And so that was hugely successful. I mean, to this day, there's still people using that #MyUnfilteredLife hashtag. And what actually happened that was quite interesting is it wasn't just people consuming content from influencer accounts, but people felt comfortable putting their own experiences up, and then people would leave comments. Like, I remember one really candidly that kind of stood out in my mind, which was someone had like taken a photograph of some of the medication they were on. They were on like maybe 5 or 6 different pills. And then other people who were just following the hashtag, leaving comments to say, you know, I've just been prescribed that by my doctor. Really interested to know your experiences of it, and someone else talking about their own experiences of having it. And just a community emerged around what could have just been quite a cynical kind of one-way traffic hashtag of promoting a message from a charity. And because they'd deliberately made it a bit more loose and kind of gone to where that audience was already, it was hugely successful. So that for me is a really nice example where it's like the levels of vulnerability are up to the user. And I think the charity's got a lot of responsibility around that. You need to be really careful, particularly with certain subject matters, of how you approach it, what you're asking of people. But what I think we've also now seen is a move away from lots of charities in the past, not as organisations in general, where social media is a thing. We put stuff up, you engage, whatever that means, and then that's it. It's like, we don't want to have a conversation with you. We don't want you to private message us. But now actually seeing the value that someone might see a post and then they might reach out in a direct message because they want to use a service, or reach out in a direct message because they want to be a volunteer. And that's the bits where the value is that follow-up, that someone's not just consuming content, but they're then going on to become a supporter or a volunteer or a service user.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think with that sort of charity campaign, it sounds like one of the most successful parts of that was just getting a few people to start to use that hashtag. And then because some people use it, it allows other people to post similar sort of types of content and do so a little bit more freely without that sort of pressure of being all like, you know, I have these problems. And you can just kind of, you just feel so much more comfortable opening up once other people open up. And that's the way of life with everyone, really. Yeah. It's like, if I was to open up about various things now with you, it's like there's a stronger chance of you opening up about other things. And so that's great. And once you get that community doing that, then obviously that just opens so many doors to people engaging with these charities even more.
And I think particularly like health charities, they've been doing it for years really effectively, but in a more kind of closed format. So we've seen like really successful health-based like closed Facebook groups and forums where, you know, it's people living with a specific condition, and those charities have created a safe space where people can come together. And the difference and the value in that versus it being, you know, on an open Instagram thread where anyone can see it. And it's that for me is where, you know, we've seen a lot of charities really harness the power of social media and use it as a tool to get their job done, and moving away from it feeling like it's a kind of cynical marketing exercise where the end goal is fundraising or the end goal is we recruit more volunteers, but actually is about, you know, our organisational aim is to build a community of people living with this condition and better supporting them and them supporting their peers. And actually we can do that on social media. It doesn't need to be in a face-to-face group, and one doesn't have more value than the other. And I think that's one of the things we've seen, particularly during COVID, is people realise that face-to-face is not some gold standard, and then online is this kind of slightly crappy alternative that you might want to go and use. Is actually, for a lot of people, doing that stuff online is more valuable, and that's the place they want to be. They don't want to come in a face-to-face space, and that's okay. Or maybe they'll feel comfortable coming in that face-to-face space because they've built that relationship with you online. And that, I think, for me, has been a really interesting thing, is charities starting to understand that much, much more.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess that is a bit of a positive then, maybe to come out of COVID-19, is that these charities are helping people engage online better. And it's interesting to me as well about how you have like these sort of places where people will all come together to talk about maybe something that's perhaps going wrong in their life and getting support, basically just getting support. Because I'm on this, well, I was on this platform called Football Index, and I probably shouldn't talk about this too much on this podcast, but this was really difficult, and obviously I lost a lot of money. Do you know anything about Football Index? Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah, it's the kind of like stocks and shares type football platform.
Yeah, and it all went into administration and went wrong, and loads of people lost loads of money. But what we definitely saw in the aftermath was a real community of football traders who had all lost a huge amount of money, all kind of coming together to support each other. And although that's not a charity, you still have the same sort of effect of people just getting real support, and people would message each other. Like, I honestly, after all of that ended, I probably received over like 50 messages on Twitter. It's really, really kind, genuine messages, checking out I was okay, because that was my work, that was my job for a long while, a few years, and I lost a lot of money, and a lot of other people did. And that is one of the benefits of social media. And I think to sort of harness that power, as you were saying earlier, to sort of create that community of people, it's so important. So it's good to hear really that you're able to help people do that. Sort of on that topic, actually, how come you did decide to get into working within the third sector rather than the public or private sector?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, yeah, so prior to working for charities, I mean, I've had some weird jobs over the years. Like, I mean, yeah, so like one of the things I used to do is I used to sell trainers from my bedroom before like trainers became like the like ludicrous value that is in them now. I probably should have stuck at that because I'd be stupidly rich now. But yeah, that was basically what I did, was literally like used to buy trainers and I would sell them on eBay, and that was my job from my bedroom. And I worked for a bank for a while. I mean, like without sounding cheesy, it's like the getting to work with charities is like a total privilege, because like most of them, the work they do is amazing and it has genuine social impact, and you get to work with pretty amazing people who are doing incredible things. And yeah, that sounds like a very gushing kind of response, doesn't it? But it's like there's an intrinsic value. Like I've got a friend who works in digital marketing, and I can remember him getting a new job, and he was working digital marketing for a company that fits like domestic blinds, you know, like so blinds for your windows. And like so his whole job, you know, was like trying to beat competitors in SEO and doing PPC ads. And like even him himself, he's like, yeah, it's quite well paid, but it's like I go to my work and I have to help a rich person sell more blinds, and that's what I do every day. And it's like, fuck, yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's just a really interesting subject matter. Get to work with really interesting people, and like charities doing amazing work. Like I'm in awe of some of the work, like in particularly like in Scotland or during COVID. Like if you look at like, so like there's a programme in Scotland called Connecting Scotland, run by the Scottish Government in partnership with SCVO, who are the kind of umbrella body for charities. But in terms of how it's delivered on the ground, it's often quite small grassroots organisations that are helping people get online. So getting their first digital device, getting them unlimited data through that programme, giving them basic digital skills, and often, you know, frontline charity workers, like literally people going to someone's house, posting a device through a letterbox, going to the window because they have to be distanced from them, and explaining to them how to put the SIM card in for the first time, showing them how to use a browser for the first time. And that's happened. I mean, like something like, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's something like 50,000 people have got online for the first time through that programme. But the whole thing is delivered through community groups and quite small charities across the country. And you think about like just that sheer scale of social impact that's been delivered is just phenomenal. And you just don't, it's just not a thing that's happening in the commercial sector. It's exciting as well. Like,
yeah, that is really cool. I think to know that you're having a positive impact on the world is just such a nice thing. Like you can just go to bed feeling like, yeah, you've maybe accomplished something. Maybe you get to work with people who have similar values to yourself. You know, if you're focused on making a positive impact and you're working with charities all the time, obviously you're going to come across loads of great people, I'm sure. So I'm guessing, do you find that in your job as well?
yeah. I mean, I'm like, usually I'm kind of in awe of the people that I work with, because they're like far brighter than I am and far more motivated than I'll ever be. So yeah, there's some amazing people. I mean, it's like any other sector, you know, there's a mix of people that you work with, but by and large, it's just a different feeling, I think, from working in the commercial sector. And it's like like people are focused on that end goal. And so for some people, you know, if you're working fundraising, that end goal is money. And actually the fundraising world is probably more closely aligned to a lot of the commercial sector, but they are so motivated because they're doing it for that end goal of that money is now going to help support more people who need a cancer nurse in their home, or support the youth work charity that they're working with. And so that level of motivation is pretty staggering, and often for like, and particularly in digital, much lower salaries than people could get in the commercial sector. Yeah, and that's a tricky thing. That's a perpetually tricky thing for the third sector, and it always has been, is how do you recruit the right people, and actually being able to recruit people who are motivated by more than the cash. Is because they could easily go to the commercial sector and get paid a ton more.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose as an individual, you have to make that trade-off really. What's most important to you is maybe making a little bit more money or doing something where you have a little bit more purpose. And in this job that I'm doing now, I'm really sort of enjoying it because Hive IT, so this is who the podcast is through, although we do work with a range of companies and then just a range of like different clients really, we do tend to try and work with people who are a lot more ethical. So we do work with a lot of charities, and I really like that aspect of things. And with this podcast, one of the other things I'll be doing is asking people within Hive how they've sort of got on working with other charities and hearing even more about what other charities have been getting up to. And it's just good to know that our company is doing something quite positive within that field. So it is nice. It does make a really nice difference. Now, we've talked a fair bit about charities and how there is so many different ones out there, and obviously you work with a wide range of different charities. This was just something that I was thinking about the other day, to be honest. But you know how Amazon have kind of taken over a large part of the private sector with selling so many different goods, and they've kind of decimated plenty of businesses around the world, unfortunately. Do we have a similar sort of effect, or like a big charity in the third sector that are maybe making the smaller charities less effective, perhaps?
I mean, don't get me wrong, there's always been an issue of, if someone's a household name. So a classic one is like, there's some charities that are household names, but actually don't provide services in Scotland. And because they're household names, we'll probably get a lot of donations from people living in Scotland, but actually the person in Scotland doesn't necessarily know that no service is going to be provided in their country. Now, you could argue that actually, does that really matter? Because the person's given money at a good cause, someone's going to benefit from it. It doesn't matter if it's on their doorstep. So that's always been an issue, I think. It's a really, really tricky one. Where I think digital has the potential to change things is this notion that actually the competitors aren't in the charity sector, the competitors potentially are in the tech sector. And I think that's something that we really, really need to get to grips with very quickly in the third sector is, if I'm a small counselling charity and I'm based in a small geographical area, and I have traditionally won like a contract with a local authority to provide counselling to primary school children, for example, but now there's a big tech platform that can do online counselling, and the per counselling session for me as a charity is 50 quid, and the per counselling session for this big tech online platform is £10, because of economies of scale and the way that they're delivering it, and maybe they're using some automation in that process. Is actually your competitors, not another charity going for that tender. Your competitor is potentially a big tech firm. So it's almost like you mentioned Amazon. It's like the competitor might be Amazon rather than the competitor is Macmillan, or the competitor is, Bernardo's or Oxfam or these other huge charity brands. And that's the bit where I think we need to see more, particularly small, medium charities collectively working together. So, if I am the counselling umbrella body for England and Wales, or for Scotland or Northern Ireland, what we need to be thinking about is how do we pool resources and get these people on a platform where we can outcompete what maybe a tech provider who's essentially encroaching in this space. And this is like, I think the other thing that charities need to remember is this is not a new thing. Like, this has been happening for years, but we're seeing it kind of start to ramp up because people are seeing that actually there's profit to be made in supporting people with their mental health, or there's profit to be made in providing school dinners to vulnerable children who can't afford them, and the commercial sector will scoop that stuff up if the third sector is not careful. Yeah, interesting. I don't have any particular answers around it, and even it's like there's a tech startup that essentially acts as a broker for people who have got individualized care budgets. So if you have a care budget and maybe you've got a rare health condition and you need support and you've got your own personalized budget, well, actually you might choose to spend that with third sector provider who's based in your community, but you might equally choose to spend it with a tech startup that can provide some of that support remotely through Internet of Things. Or actually what we're also seeing is there's a few tech startups who essentially act as brokers. And so someone might have the personalized budget and it sits in a kind of centralized space, and then people might bid for that, or the person might choose based on a kind of TripAdvisor type system. And so we're kind of seeing a move away from the traditional model. It might have been someone works with a healthcare professional or social worker who says you should go and work with this charity, that's the person you should go and do it, where actually now people have more control over their own money, and they might go to you as a charity, but they might go to someone who's a commercial provider, or they might go to someone who's that third party that sits in the middle. And that's where it's starting to get interesting and potentially quite messy, is actually more and more commercial, quite tech-based providers coming in a space that was traditionally the realm of third sector organisations.
Yeah, that is a big challenge, really. I think it sounds to me like maybe that collaboration is quite important then amongst the charities. One thing that we've actually just worked on at Hive, and I feel like I need to stop plugging Hive. That's not really the full intention, but one project that just really does relate to this, and I think it is quite interesting, is that we've just finished building the Sheffield's mental health guides. So they already had a website, and I think Hive have come in and just tried to make it a lot more cleaner, quicker, and have made it so it's a lot easier to use, really, so that you can just search for the wide range of charities in Sheffield very easily. So that kind of helps all of those charities be in one place at the same time, which I think is quite important, really. And so do you think in your job, or do you have any ideas around how charities could maybe collaborate a little bit more to make them more effective?
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting. I think in many cases the tech isn't the issue. So the tech's not the issue when it comes to, say, collaboration, for example, but actually kind of culture and ways of working and decision making and collaboration are often the tricky bit. So it's like, you know, we've got an end goal that's, say, like, for example, that, you know, a mental health directory or signposting site, and there might be 25 different providers that are kind of inputting content into that. And the tricky bit isn't like technically how do we do that, because executing it's not difficult. The tricky bit is how do we get 25 mental health charities to agree on how you describe a service? How do we get 25 mental health charities to decide on where each of their logos is going to sit? And it's that process bit that's often the bit that requires loads and loads of time, not the bit of we're going to build the thing, because building the thing is often quite easy and it's based on tried and tested methodology. But the tricky thing is getting people to actually work together and collaborate where that's not naturally how they might do things or how decisions are made. And actually a lot of the work that we've been doing, and particularly during COVID, has not necessarily been about the tech, but it's been about different ways of working and different ways of making decisions. So how do we take service design principles so that we can better understand what users want and need and how they can genuinely influence that process, rather than we ran a focus group or we did a survey monkey with 17 users and then we made decisions based on that? Or how do we better make use of data to make decisions, and actually starting to remove people's personal opinions from these processes, or just that someone has a good idea and that's enough. Is like, the good idea is the starting point, but how do we validate that through service design or through the data that's going to tell us whether that thing is actually needed in the first place? And so for me, that's the bit, is like starting to change those cultures. And I think we've seen like loads of positive steps around COVID where people have been forced to use things like whether it's Teams or Slack or whether it's Zoom calls. But actually sometimes we're seeing a kind of perpetuation of the things that were bad in the workplace, but now they're happening online. So people feeling like utter fatigue at relentless Zoom meetings. And all we've done is really taken the structures of the workplace and now we've stuck them online, rather than thinking, well, where's the potential for asynchronous work and where's the potential for collaboration? We had loads of meetings in an office. Now we have to do those same meetings that last 4 hours where we just go around and tell everyone what we did for the last month, but now we do it in a Zoom call. And so that's where I think that potential for collaboration gets really interesting, is where you can show charities, here's how you can make meaningful decisions and here's how you can do it really quickly, rather than, you know, the end goal is a website, but it's going to take you 3 months to get there because you're going to have 17 meetings and you can't decide anything and you end up with this quite fudged product. Is actually giving them those kind of skills and confidence to take processes from the tech world and apply that to the charity world.
Yeah, so do you think COVID is maybe provided an opportunity to have a bit of a clean slate in terms of having ideas around the whole methodology of the work that you do, rather than just having individuals have their own psychological biases and personal reasons to work in certain ways. You're then trying to help the charities sort of have a clean start in terms of their way of thinking about how they are most effective in working with various people.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, for a lot of them, it's not about, you need to go and send 20 members of staff and some service design masters and they have to become utter experts in this stuff. It's like having a shared set of principles that you adhere to as an organisation, so that everyone knows that, when we go and apply to the lottery for that new project, it's not good enough that we just sat down with 5 people who have got a relationship with the charity already and asked them if they want a thing, and they all nodded, and we were like, well, that's validated the thing, and now we're going to apply for the thing and we get money for the thing, and then the thing runs for 2 years and we go, the thing's kind of not really working, is it? And then we kind of rip it up and we do it again. Is like getting people to understand how you design that service in the first place, getting people comfortable with the fact that there'll be iterative steps, that you'll get stuff wrong, but if you change it in small increments every few months, you'll end up with a nice product that people actually want and are going to use. Whereas I think in the past, not universally, but a lot of us we develop a service, when we do it behind closed doors, we present it to a bunch of people as if it's 100% complete. And all we're asking for is validation as to whether they're going to use that thing, rather than thinking, how do we meaningfully produce that alongside them, and how do they meaningfully have some influence on what that looks like, rather than like we present and go, would you use a service if it was on Zoom? It's like we've already got far too far down that journey, and we've not used any of those people's skill set or their own lived experiences in trying to get to that point. So it's almost like giving charities that ability to kind of take a pause and discover, like, how are people living their lives? What do they want from us? What's going to be meaningful to them? Rather than thinking, what is the legacy of the way that we've always done things? And now we put that on Zoom, or now we put it on Teams, or whatever that looks like.
Yeah, that makes sense. What other advice do you have for maybe charities in terms of improving their digital presence and being more effective online?
Yeah, so I think, one of the big things, we've done a lot of work with the Catalyst, who are a kind of collective of organisations working in tech for good in the UK. And the Catalyst has done some amazing work over the last year. And a big principle that kind of underpins almost everything they do is this concept of reuse. So this assumption that the thing you're trying to do exists already, whether that's in the area that you work in, whether it's in the UK or whether it's globally, there's only ever a tiny, tiny fraction of charity digital services that haven't been done already. And whether that's about the actual deployment of the service, whether it's about a back-end process, is that assumption that it's happened. And actually going in with that is quite liberating. And it's kind of moving away from this kind of thing that I think has plagued digital, and particularly the charity sector, where it's like stuff always has to be innovative. And actually it doesn't. It's like you're not starting from scratch every time you do something. And so one of the pieces of work that the Catalyst has done is this concept around service recipes. So this is a move away from what would traditionally have been case studies, where you can see another charity's done a nice thing, you see a nice fluffy story about how it's helped someone, and you get excited about it, but there's no way of you deploying that yourself because you don't actually know how they did it and what the tech stack was that sat behind it, or the processes that sat behind it. And so what the Catalyst is trying to do over the last year, and we've been part of this, is trying to kind of, charities had a good success story. What does that actually look like in terms of another charity basically lifting and shifting that process? And so the recipes are just the same way that if you saw a nice picture of a plate of food, that's great, but how do you actually cook that food? What are the core ingredients? What are the steps that you go through? And so they've broken down tech services essentially. So you can get them on the Catalyst website, and they're adding to that as we go. A really nice example actually is Bernardo's very quickly moved a lot of their services for vulnerable children onto WhatsApp. And so the tech bit of it is easy because like almost everyone has WhatsApp on the device. Everyone knows how WhatsApp works. The tricky bit is, how do we onboard a vulnerable young person who's maybe experiencing difficult things at home and needs to get access to the device? How do we make sure that school knows that that young person is safe? How do we have a process so that if that young person is on a chat with us and someone is seeing that chat who doesn't need to, we don't want to continue that chat, do we have a safe word with that young person? So the difficult thing is not the tech, the difficult thing is like, how do we safeguard children? What are the processes that need to sit around that? How is it GDPR compliant? And so Bernardo's basically essentially open sourced, like the workshops they ran at the outset with children. So they open sourced, here's how we ran the workshop, here was some of the findings that we got from that. They open sourced, here's some of the processes we put in place to make sure it was GDPR compliant. And so the tech bit is not the difficult bit, but what Bernardo's has made simple is, if I run a really small children's services charity and I'm based in Sheffield and we don't have any tech knowledge and we have very little budget, I can basically take that service Bernardo's is deployed in WhatsApp and I can lift it and I might make some small tweaks, but within a week I could be running that service. So I'm not trying to do that thing from scratch. I'm not looking at a case study where I go, well, that's fine for Bernardo's, but they're massive. Is actually I can take it and I can deploy it really quickly. And that for me is, I think as soon as charities can get their head around that, the potential becomes pretty colossal. And they could look at a service that's maybe running in Canada and bring it to the UK for the first time.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Ross, that sounds a lot better than a 300+ page manual.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that could really change things if charities started to use that sort of approach. Catalyst, you said it's called. That's awesome. I think we'll probably have to wrap it up around now. Really value your time, and I've learned so much from this episode because, to be honest, prior to this conversation, I knew next to nothing about how the third sector operated online. So this has been really interesting to me. So thanks for coming on. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, so Twitter mainly, so Third Sector Lab on Twitter, or the free training that I mentioned, the curve that we run. So if you go to thirdsectorlab.co.uk and you click the training tab, anyone who works for a charity in the UK can book a free place, and so we'll run those weekly. Some of the other organisations I mentioned, so if you Google the Catalyst, you'll find the service recipes that I mentioned, things like the Digital Senior Leadership Programme that I run in collaboration with SCVO. So if you go to scvo.scot, you can find out information on that as well.
Awesome stuff. Thanks again, Ross. And I'm sure we'll have a few listeners and people that maybe we work with, or just people who follow us on Twitter, who will probably have a look at this video, and hopefully some of those charities as well will learn one or two things and can maybe improve their online presence a little bit further. So really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone watching. I hope you have enjoyed this episode, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.